There is a truth about your body that has been hidden from you for over a century. A truth so profound that it challenges everything you think you know about health, disease, and the very nature of life itself. The man who discovered this truth was not just a scientist. He was a revolutionary. His name was Louis Pasteur, and what he found in his final years would shake him to his very core. But here's what they don't want you to know. The medical establishment buried his most important discovery. They took his greatest revelation and turned it into their greatest lie. You see, when Louis Pasteur lay dying in 1895, he whispered something to his colleagues that would haunt the medical world forever. He said, "The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything." These 7 words contained a secret that could transform how we understand disease, healing, and human potential itself. But why would they hide this from you? Why would an entire industry built on fighting germs want to suppress the very truth discovered by the father of germ theory himself? The answer will change everything you believe about your own body. Louis Pasteur spent decades convincing the world that tiny, invisible creatures called germs were the enemy of mankind. He showed them how these microscopic invaders caused disease, death, and suffering. The medical world embraced his germ theory with religious fervor. It gave them an enemy to fight. It gave them a reason to exist. But Pasteur was not content with simple answers. He was a seeker of deeper truths. And as he aged, as he observed more, as he conducted experiment after experiment, he began to notice something that disturbed him greatly. The germ theory was incomplete. It was perhaps even wrong. He noticed that not everyone exposed to the same germs became sick. He watched as some people thrived in environments that should have killed them, while others fell ill in seemingly perfect conditions. He observed that the same bacteria could be harmless in one person and deadly in another. This observation would lead him to a discovery that the medical industry would spend the next century trying to suppress. Pasteur realized that the germ was not the primary cause of disease. The germ was merely the match. But what determined whether that match would start a fire was the terrain, the internal environment of the body itself. Think of it this way. A match cannot start a fire in a lake. But that same match can ignite a forest that is dry, brittle, and ready to burn. The match is not the real problem. The condition of the forest is what determines the outcome. Your body is that forest, and the terrain of your body, its pH, its nutritional status, its emotional state, its spiritual condition, this is what determines whether germs can take hold and cause disease. But this truth was too dangerous for an industry that had built its entire foundation on fighting germs. Pasteur's colleague, Antoine Béchamp, had been arguing this point for years. Béchamp believed that germs were not invaders from outside, but rather natural organisms that changed form based on the condition of the terrain they inhabited. He called this process pleomorphism, the ability of organisms to change their shape and function based on their environment. According to Béchamp, bacteria could transform from helpful to harmful, depending on the internal conditions of the body. They were not fixed enemies, but adaptive responders to the terrain they found themselves in. This meant that the same organism could be beneficial in a healthy body and pathogenic in an unhealthy one. It meant that the secret to health was not in fighting germs, but in maintaining the proper terrain. But the medical establishment chose Pasteur's earlier work over Béchamp's terrain theory. They chose war over harmony. They chose suppression over cultivation. And Louis Pasteur, in his final years, realized they had made a terrible mistake. The implications of this suppressed truth are staggering. If the terrain is everything, then you have more power over your health than you've ever been told. You are not a victim of random microbial attacks. You are the master of your own internal environment. But there's something even deeper here, something that goes beyond just physical health. The terrain theory suggests that your body is not separate from your mind, your emotions, your spiritual state. Your inner terrain is influenced by your thoughts, your beliefs, your relationships, your connection to purpose and meaning. Pasteur began to understand that true health was not about sterilization and isolation. It was about creating the optimal conditions for life to flourish. It was about harmony, not warfare. He realized that fear, stress, nutritional depletion, emotional trauma, spiritual disconnection, these were the real enemies. These were what created the conditions where harmful organisms could take hold and cause disease. This is why two people can be exposed to the same deadly virus, and one remains perfectly healthy while the other becomes gravely ill. It's not about luck. It's not about genetics alone. It's about terrain. But acknowledging this truth would have meant acknowledging that people had more control over their health than the medical system wanted them to believe. It would have meant admitting that lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, and spiritual well-being were more important than drugs and procedures. It would have meant a complete transformation of how medicine was practiced. Instead, they doubled down on germ theory. They created an entire industry based on fighting invisible enemies. They convinced generations of people that their bodies were weak, vulnerable, and constantly under attack. They made you forget that your body is a miraculous, self-healing system. They made you forget that health is your natural state. They made you forget the power of your own terrain. But here's what they couldn't suppress entirely. The evidence keeps mounting that Pasteur was right in his final revelation. Modern research is now showing that the microbiome, the trillions of organisms living in and on your body, is not a collection of enemies to be destroyed, but a complex ecosystem that must be balanced and nurtured. Scientists are discovering that the same bacteria that cause illness in some people are actually beneficial in others. They're finding that the key to health is not sterility, but diversity and balance in our microbial communities. They're learning that stress, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, social isolation, and spiritual emptiness create the conditions where harmful organisms thrive and beneficial ones cannot survive. In other words, they're rediscovering what Pasteur knew in his final years. The terrain is everything, but this knowledge is still being suppressed by those who profit from your fear of germs. Every time you reach for antibacterial soap, every time you live in fear of invisible threats, every time you believe that disease just happens to you randomly, you're reinforcing a system built on Pasteur's early, incomplete understanding rather than his mature wisdom. The truth is that your body knows how to heal. Your immune system knows how to adapt. Your internal ecosystem knows how to maintain balance. If you give it the right conditions, those conditions include proper nutrition, not just the absence of bad foods, but the presence of life-giving nutrients that feed your beneficial organisms and starve the harmful ones. They include movement and exercise that keeps your internal rivers flowing and your cellular terrain oxygenated and vital. They include sleep that allows your body's natural repair and detoxification systems to function optimally. They include managing stress and trauma, because chronic stress hormones create an acidic, inflammatory terrain where harmful organisms thrive. They include meaningful relationships and community, because isolation and loneliness have been shown to suppress immune function and alter the microbiome in harmful ways. They include purpose and meaning, because hopelessness and despair create biochemical changes that compromise your terrain. And perhaps most importantly, they include the understanding that you are not a victim of random microbial attacks, but the curator of an incredible internal ecosystem. When Pasteur whispered, "The germ is nothing, the terrain is everything," he was giving humanity a gift. He was telling us that we have more power than we know. He was revealing that true healing comes not from fighting our nature, but from understanding and working with it. But this gift was wrapped up and hidden away by those who preferred to profit from our fear rather than empower our healing. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to live in fear of invisible enemies, constantly at war with a microbial world that is actually an essential part of your existence? Or will you embrace the deeper truth that Pasteur discovered? That health comes from creating the optimal terrain for life to flourish? Will you continue to see your body as weak and vulnerable, constantly needing external interventions to survive? Or will you recognize the incredible wisdom and power of your own internal healing systems? The medical establishment built an empire on the idea that germs are your enemy. But Pasteur's final revelation tells us something far more profound. The germs are simply messengers, telling you about the state of your terrain. When your terrain is optimal, when your body is properly nourished, when your stress is managed, when you're connected to purpose and community, when you're living in alignment with your deepest values, then even the most feared microorganisms cannot gain a foothold. But when your terrain is compromised, when you're living on processed foods that feed harmful organisms, when you're chronically stressed and inflamed, when you're isolated and without purpose, when you're disconnected from your own healing wisdom, then even normally harmless organisms can become problematic. This is the secret they don't want you to know. This is the truth that was buried with Louis Pasteur. Your health is not determined by luck, genetics, or random microbial attacks. Your health is determined by the choices you make every day about how you care for your terrain. Every meal is a choice about what organisms you're feeding. Every thought is a choice about the biochemical environment you're creating. Every relationship is a choice about the social and emotional terrain you're cultivating. You are not powerless. You are not a victim. You are the gardener of an incredible internal ecosystem. And the quality of that garden determines everything about your health and vitality. This is what Louis Pasteur knew in his final years. This is the truth he tried to pass on before he died. This is the secret that could transform not just medicine, but our entire understanding of what it means to be human. The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. And the terrain is in your hands. The question is, what kind of garden will you choose to grow?